Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Sunday, September 21st, day 716 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horovitz. Thanks for joining me from our Jerusalem office, David.
Hi, Amanda.
David is just back from a whirlwind 48 hours in Syria, and we'll hear all about the trip and more when we're back from a break. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our editor, David Horovitz. First, some headlines. A gunman opened fire in a New Hampshire country club on Saturday, killing one person and wounding several others. The man who opened fire at the country club reportedly yelled, "Free Palestine," while carrying out the deadly shooting. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer is planning to announce new sanctions on the Hamas terror group at the same time as he announces the UK's recognition of a Palestinian state, according to The Telegraph. British media reported on Saturday that Starmer will publish a statement today confirming the UK's recognition of an independent Palestinian state following the France-led push for coordinated recognition at the UN General Assembly. In Gaza, 10 IDF soldiers were lightly injured when a military vehicle they were in overturned during operations in the northern Gaza Strip this morning. The troops were taken to a hospital in Israel for treatment. 2 rockets were launched from the northern Gaza Strip at the southern coastal city of Ashdod a short while ago, just before recording. One rocket was intercepted by air defenses, while the second struck an open area, according to the IDF. David, let's turn to you. And every single Israeli journalist I know is extremely jealous of you right now because you have fulfilled a dream of most of us, which is going to the neighbor to the north that is about 3 hours away as far as the car drives, but took a bit longer for you to get to. So tell us about, first of all, how did you even enter Syria?
Well, this was a trip set up by a very nice Michigan rabbi, Asher Lofatin, and he reached out to somebody on our staff who actually couldn't make the trip, so I delightedly accepted the invitation instead. It was basically an American Jewish group with an Israeli journalist tagging along. We flew, it took 3 flights. I say we, actually me. In other words, I was one of 2 people coming from Israel. The other one is an American who lives here at the moment, and I didn't know him until the trip. And it's, there's no flights from Israel to Turkey either at the moment. So you can't drive from Jerusalem to Damascus, and you have to fly via Athens to Istanbul to Damascus. So 3 flights in each direction.
Okay. And you are an Israeli citizen as well as a UK citizen. Did you have any kind of, trepidation about being an Israeli in Syria?
Well, I just didn't know what to expect. And my assumption would be that, was that it would be potentially a little bit awkward. I was conscious that many people in this group are very obviously Jewish. There was 2 rabbis in the group who look like rabbis. Asher, as it turned out, wore his kippah most of the time. A lovely Chabad rabbi from Turkey looked like a rabbi. There's a very prominent American Jewish scholar who was with us, with a very long beard, and his lovely wife, both in their mid-70s. So I was conscious that we'd be a pretty obviously Jewish group and not exactly fast-moving. So there was some concern about that. I didn't know if they would let me in at all. Asher had assured me that my bio details, the editor of the Times of Israel, had been conveyed to the Syrians. They knew exactly who they were letting in. But still, I wasn't sure that they would let me in. And so, personal trepidation, I don't think so. But in terms of, was it going to work out? A bit of that. And, it was just from the very beginning, I wrote surreal in the headline because it was surreal because we landed in Damascus Airport and there's buses to take passengers from the plane to the terminal. And we weren't on the buses. We were a VIP group in a little convoy of BMWs that they'd provided, driving us around to the back of the terminal to the VIP room. Now, this is a terminal that Israel bombed several times soon after October the 7th, when there was friction and some conflict on the border. And so from that moment on, really, it's welcome to Syria, indeed welcome to the Syrian Damascus Airport terminal that in your case, Mr. Horovitz, your army was bombing. I mean, obviously they didn't say that, just the contrast between a VIP welcome, and the context in which, a very short time ago, things were openly hostile. And even, other contexts, not a short time ago, right now, last few weeks in Sueda in southern Syria and so on. So it was taking place in this, extremely bizarre context.
And I mean, for me, I hear Syria and I just think war torn. And I think that's the case for many people who live outside of Israel. But for those of us who live in Israel, we're living our lives. It's everyday life. And yes, I did just say that 2 rockets were shot out of Gaza. And yes, of course, the Houthis do attempt to shoot rockets at us several times every week. But for us, it's just ho-hum, everyday life. And did you feel that was the sense in Damascus, at least, that people are just living their lives and the war is in the very far background?
I think the most important thing to stress is that I was there for 2 days and I was only in Damascus, except for we went a little bit out of the city to a neighborhood called Jobar, which was a Jewish neighborhood for a long time. There was a synagogue there dating back many, many centuries that was still in use until the outbreak of the Civil War. It was a rebel stronghold during the Civil War, and it is utterly destroyed. And I of course, I write about everything that I'm telling you now as well. And therefore, that was the only direct encounter that we had with war, I suppose. And I think the Damascus area that we saw, which is fairly poor, but not desperately poor. We walked through the souk, the market. It's a real market. It's not a tourism market, of course. It's where people get their food and their clothes and so on. There is food. People are living their lives. I wonder how much of a bubble Damascus is. There was an official with us, and she went with us to Jabar, and she'd never been there before. It's 15 minutes from really where we were, and she was, devastated, I think, very affected to see the absolute destruction of this neighborhood. So we were in an area, at least, where the war was probably as remote as war is anywhere in Syria.
But of course, it affects everyday life. And just before we dive into your itinerary, which was so packed, I'd love you to tell the anecdote of you changing $100.
Yeah, in retrospect, well, I guess it was a good thing because I brought back a great deal of Syrian currency, which lots of people, I'm happy to, give out to lots of people. Bashar Assad's face is still on the 2,000 Syrian pound note. So that's really quite something. But yeah, I changed $100, which in retrospect was ridiculous because I got 1.34 million Syrian pounds. And the pile of notes was, it was, I guess, normal brick. If you think of a normal building brick, kind of 2 bricks of notes, which of course, what are you supposed to do with that, right? Thought I'd go to the souk and buy some little representative, items for my trip. And by the way, didn't find very many of those. But what are you supposed to do with it? I was wearing normal pants. I had 2 pockets in them. You couldn't possibly get all of that money into your pockets. So they gave me a plastic bag. Again, $100. So obviously, I should have changed maybe 20, but it's, there's a deeper relevance to that, of course, which is the currency has devalued hugely since 2011. My understanding is they're about to chop a couple of zeros off the currency and sort of redo things. I don't even begin to understand how that works. And the person who was with me, I said, so that's pretty bad. The economy is pretty bad. And he said, yeah, but the country's, in a better place, or moving to a better place. I thought that was quite interesting. I'm not sure where the country is moving, and I don't think people there are too. I think, we didn't get into the itinerary and so on, but the message that was being conveyed by some of the very impressive ministers who we met was a sense of make or break, that there's really no time to waste. As one very senior official said to our group, when civil wars, when there's a transition and an effort to sort of break out of civil war, generally it doesn't work and civil war resumes. And that hasn't happened here, he said, but we've got a very limited window. And that's, I think, the sense that, again, another minister said, if this fails, then Syria is finished. Was pretty, drastic and dramatic to hear somebody say that, because that's what he genuinely thinks.
Right. So your trip basically had 2 tracks at the same time. You had the See the Jewish Sites track, and you saw one of the most amazing Jewish sites ever. We'll get to that. And then you also had the meet and greet, friendly relations kind of track. So let's start with the see the Jewish sites track. And you started in a bombed out synagogue, which, very emblematic of the state of Syrian Jewry. But it wasn't like that 100 years ago. It wasn't like that even maybe 60 years ago. When was the complete decline of the Syrian Jewish community? There are 6 people now? 6 Jews?
Yeah, literally 6. I mean, there's some mild discussion depending on, other people who may be kind of Jewish, but basically 4 men and 2 women, compared to, I wrote the numbers there, maybe 50,000 shortly before Israel was founded in 1947, and an exodus that accelerated in the 70s and 80s and 90s. That synagogue in Jabbar was in use, I think, until maybe 15, 16 years ago. Not sure how many people were around to use it, but it was there. And now there's nothing. It's not like the ruins of a synagogue. It's the place where a synagogue was. There's nothing. And even in the last few months, because Asher Lopatin had been at the beginning of this year, there was an arch. There was one last arch remaining. So that's gone now. And what was a first on this trip was we were in the National Museum of Damascus, and they showed us into a storeroom where the Assad era regime had brought materials that had survived the shellings and the fire in that shul, which there's a picture in there you can see. They're sort of waiting for someone to help them restore and make it available to go on exhibit. So that's where we started. Then we went to the Jewish cemetery. Then we had this extraordinary encounter with synagogue doors that had been stolen from another shul, and the police had got back right away. I think that was an effort to broadcast the sense that, hey, the local leadership here really wants the Jews to feel safe. I mean, there's a lot of that undertone. There's an exiled Jewish community, especially in Brooklyn. They want people to come back. They want people to invest. That's, a fairly large subtext of this visit. And so, there, of the 2 sort of highlights, I suppose, one was going into I don't even want to say things I don't know, a potentially functioning synagogue in the Jewish area of Damascus where we reopened the synagogue, lots of locks and chains. And you went into a shul that looked like, they had Mariv the night before. It's a shul. But it hadn't been used. It certainly hadn't had a minyan for many years. So there was a minyan. How is that possible when there was only 9 of us in the group and 2 of them were women? Well, because there were some other people who were somehow there and somebody, was friendly with. It was a bare minyan, but we had a minyan. And that was really something. And then on the second day, apart from meeting lots of ministers and so on, which we'll talk about, we went to that Damascus National Museum and we saw the wall paintings from Dura Europos. And that was really, I suppose, the most historically significant thing that we did on the trip, because this is something like a 2,000-year-old ex-synagogue or synagogue, which has had biblical scenes depicted on its walls. There was also a ceiling. Many of the tiles from that ceiling are held in universities in the United States, so they've kind of reconstructed the ceiling. But the wall paintings are the wall paintings. And how on earth did they survive? And this is something I didn't write in the piece, but I really want to say it. The events that they depict, right, were drawn closer in time to those events happening than to us now. You understand? What we saw there is more proximate to the events of the Bible than the era in which we are living. I'm still having trouble getting my head around that. It's quite an extraordinary thing. And everyone knew that this was rediscovered. The synagogue and other things in Dura Europos, which is in eastern Syria, were discovered by archaeologists in 1932. How on earth did any of this survive? Because the synagogue was built essentially adjacent to or as part of the wall of this city. And the Romans were anticipating invasion and attacks by, I think, the Persians. I promise you, almost anybody in this field is more expert than I am, but that's my understanding. And they packed the shul and other buildings with earth and debris to fortify the walls of the city against the anticipated invaders. And therefore, obviously the invaders did not destroy the shul. The shul survived, and it was buried, under whatever layers of whatever build up over 2,000 years. And then in 1932, along come the archaeologists, and they start removing the debris from this structure. And these wall paintings have survived because they were densely surrounded by earth and debris. And somewhere between 1932 and last week, and I think it was probably in the 60s, and maybe people know definitively, I couldn't establish, this was moved to the Damascus Museum. Now, when I first wrote the piece, I wrote, the reconstructed in the, I couldn't even internalize to myself what I had seen. But of course, I realized they didn't peel the paintings off the walls because that would not happen, right? They took the walls of the shul and they reassembled them in the Damascus Museum. Now, I don't know what's going on behind those walls, but those are the walls with the paintings. And I don't know when anyone last saw them, and I don't know when anyone Jewish last saw them. But one of the members of our group is an academic. Her name is Jill Joshowitz, and she's just finished a book on things like this, figurative drawings of biblical scenes in ancient shuls and so on. I mean, I wrote the name of her book in the piece. And she's like, I don't know. Are they still there? Are they in any kind of condition? And if they are we going to be allowed to see them? And yeah, they're there. They're in amazing condition. I mean, if you've seen The Last Supper in Milan, and you know that it's every day, they're more worried about it, bits of it falling off and so on, because he used the wrong paint on the wrong surface, whatever. So we got 2,000-year-old wall paintings. You're not meant to call them frescoes because they're drawn with tempera. Again, there are people more expert than me, but there they are, like from yesterday, these incredible scenes. And there are 3 depictions of the menorah, for example. And Jill was, it was important to say, I think she wants to say biblical menorah rather than temple menorah, because maybe these are not exactly what the menorah looked like in the temple. Again, she's the expert. And we're in this room, and she, of course, is the most, dumbstruck, I suppose. And it was an incredible scene. And the curator of the museum, who's a very pleasant woman, and Jill were basically, Jill starts explaining everything to everybody, and then the curator and Jill are going around and sort of pooling their knowledge of what's on display there. And there's the rabbi from Turkey saying, I don't even know when a rabbi last saw any of this. And it was astonishing. And then you turn around, and we're in a convoy on this trip of 6 vehicles. So there's 6 drivers. I don't even know who let them into the museum, but there they are. And they're all sort of gazing up at the ceiling and around the walls. And it was just, quite an extraordinary scene.
And just to finish off this section, give us a sense of the scope. How large of a room? How high are these walls?
Yeah, so I think they're about 20 feet up. It's a big room. The room is wider than it is high. So I don't know, maybe 30, 40 feet across. Again, there are people who this is all documented. You can check this. But it's a big room. One wall is completely intact. The 2 side walls have a lot of painting on them. The back wall does not. And as I said, the ceiling is a reconstructed version, some of which does survive. It was tiles, and it's, I think Yale has some of the tiles and so on.
And the colors, when I saw it, of course, I wasn't there firsthand, but it just kind of reminded me of Masada or any of the, palaces that Herod also created. It's the same palette, it feels like, the reds and the yellows. Did you have that sense as well, that there was some kind of tie?
I don't have enough expertise to say how similar or otherwise, but yeah, those are the colors. It was striking that there's no God represented. And as Jill pointed out, this was a millennia, 1,000 years before. Maimonides had basically said, don't even try to, capture in any kind of figurative form the divine power. He didn't say don't paint God in your synagogues, but he was saying that the divine force is not something that we should even think about as having some kind of bodily appearance. And in these multiple scenes, there are many where there are sort of hands high up. And that was the artists of that era who, however they reached this conclusion, again, I'm saying, 1,000 years before Maimonides explained why you can't really be drawing God, they were not drawing God.
Fascinating. Let's go to a short break. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our Times of Israel editor, David Horovitz. David, we've gone on very long, but I do want to pinpoint a little bit more of what you heard from the Syrian government ministers along this whirlwind 48 hours. So what kind of level of ministers were you meeting during this delegation?
Okay, so we had 4 meetings with representatives of the government. I think the most important in terms of Israel was with the head of the American Affairs Department at the Foreign Ministry. I think he may also be a deputy foreign minister, but I'm not certain about that. And he was the only one really who spoke about relations with Israel to any degree. He's very angry with the Netanyahu government. He thinks that Netanyahu is trying to make it harder for them to establish stability in the south. He thinks that Israel targeted the wrong people in Sweden. In other words, their security forces, the way he put it, were trying to prevent bloodshed and restore calm. And Israel, in his telling, fired at the security forces rather than the separatist combatants, shall we say. And he thinks that Israel's making a mistake. On December the 8th, 2024, which was the culmination of the ousting of Assad, there was an effort around that period, there was an effort by both Iran and Hezbollah to sort of take advantage of a potential vacuum, the way that this official told it, in southern Syria. And they were fortunately able to make sure that Iran and Hezbollah did not set up any kind of presence. And his assessment is that if there is instability, Iran and Hezbollah are anxious to try and reestablish some kind of presence there. And therefore, Israel's interest, the way he sees it, is if their leadership can establish stability. I wonder if the Israeli assessment is that maybe they will be able to, and maybe that ultimately would not be to Israel's benefit, because who knows where this leadership may focus once it has achieved stability, if it can do so. At the same time, you have the US President, Donald Trump, who's working to enable or nudge Israel and Syria towards some kind of security arrangement. And that seems to be the sort of the stronger force at the moment. It'll be very interesting to see what plays out in the next few days. And the other 3 people we met, one was a lower level official in the foreign ministry who's been appointed to take care of Jewish concerns, which is, quite something, including issues relating, I think, to confiscated property and stuff like that. Again, with this theme of wanting to reach out to Syrian Jews abroad. And then we met the Minister of Labor and Social Affairs. She's a Christian woman, the only woman. And we met the economy minister, who was extremely likable and who said, I know there's some contacts between Israel and Syria. I think these things take time and they require a certain amount of massaging, he said. And perhaps your visit is one of those massages. That was quite sweet.
One of the things that I noted that the female minister, I don't recall her name, said, it was something along the lines of she had served under the Assad regime as well?
No, she hadn't. The trade minister had, and he resigned in 2011 and very delicately put it that he managed essentially to get out intact, because I don't think you quit the Assad government with much of a future on a personal level. He somehow survived. He's a very, very well-trained economist. He was the head of a department at Fannie Mae for 7 years, I think their global marketing department, very American savvy. Hind, who's the Christian Labor and Social Affairs minister, she went to school with Bashar Assad, and she knew him a little later. But she didn't. I don't think she ever worked for the government. But she said, with Bashar Assad, you couldn't say no to anything, and with Ashara, she says, you can say no and explain. And it was interesting to me. I think she's an opposition figure, and the opposition has now become the leadership. But I think there are ministers in this government who are not necessarily, they weren't part significantly of the opposition, of this jihadist force that is now running Syria. But some of them, at least, have joined the government under Ashara because they think it's the best chance that Syria has. I think that's very interesting, that within a few months, Ashara was able to identify people who would be helpful, and that they have been willing to work for him because of their interest in trying to stabilize Syria. And that's what, this sense of urgency and no messing about. If we fail, Syria is finished, said the economy minister to us. And therefore, like I said, no messing around. This is a moment of truth for us. We have to work as fast as we can to see if we can stabilize the country.
And at the same time, what she said was something along the lines of, Ashara listens to them. You can have a discussion. And so there's this urgency, and yet it's not a dictatorship at this point, is what it sounded like she was saying.
So yeah, that for sure, with the caveat that, this was a 2-day trip of non-expert people who were being treated very graciously. That's what we saw. What it means, how it will play out, that we do not know.
Okay, David, I think the most burning question that I haven't asked yet is obviously about the hummus, and how did it stack up to our Israeli hummus?
As you know, there's an expression about the day will come when Israelis will be eating hummus in Damascus, and that was an expression of, when peace comes, and won't that be great? So peace has not come, but we ate hummus in Damascus, and it was kosher hummus, to which I defer to Mendy Shitrik, who is the chief Ashkenazi rabbi of Turkey, and who took care of kosher supervision. I mean, to the point where he brought meat in his suitcase, frozen meat, and he koshered the kitchen at the hotel where we were staying. And he went, I don't know where he went, I wasn't with him, but he secured hummus, where he had established that the preparation and the utensils and all the circumstances were such that it was perfectly fine for stringently observant Jews to eat. And it was extremely good, Amanda. That's the short answer to your question. It was very good hummus, and kosher at that.
Something else to look forward to on my one-day trip to Syria. David, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Amanda. It was really a pleasure to have this conversation, because so often what we talk about is not full of hope and joy.
And I'll take this opportunity as well to say Shana Tova, David. A good year.
To everybody who listens, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by Ben Wallach. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.